My name is Mabel Carter. That night, on a deserted road wrapped in mist, I clutched a trembling stray dog to my chest when 3 drunken men emerged from the shadows, circling like predators. Their coarse laughter tore through the freezing air, each step closing the gap and making my pulse race. I thought that might be the end of me, until headlights sliced through the darkness and a black SUV rolled to a stop. A man stepped out, his eyes unnervingly calm, and spoke a single sentence that made them all retreat without another word. It was the start of a chain of secrets that would change everything. Have you ever had a stranger save your life only to discover they were hiding something? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so we can continue this story together. I was born in a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, above an old appliance repair shop. My mother worked whenever the hospital called, day shifts, night shifts, and I grew up to the sound of distant ambulance sirens and the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to her clothes. My father left when I was 5. No hug, no goodbye, just a folded note and an empty bank account. My mother cried for weeks, then built herself into a cold, unshakable wall. She taught me that if I wanted to survive, I had to rely on myself, that no one in this world gave you anything for free. I believed her until she met Ralph. He arrived in my mother's life with gestures anyone would call charming. Flowers at the hospital, washing dishes after dinner, calling me daughter in front of neighbors. But once the door closed, that politeness vanished. It began with harmless-sounding remarks. You left your shoes at the door, or, you eat more than other girls your age. Over time, his words sharpened, slicing little pieces off me. No wonder the fridge is empty. You eat like you're keeping someone else from getting their share. If you stayed in your room more, this house might be quieter. I tried to endure it. I worked weekends at a coffee shop, saving every dollar to help Mom with the electric bill and groceries. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, Ralph would ease up. He never did. The breaking point came one winter evening. I came home smelling of coffee and cigarette smoke from the shop. Ralph sat at the table tapping his fingers. My mother stood at the sink, silent. You used the wrong pan again, he said. I forced a small smile. I washed it, there's nothing wrong with it. This one's lost its non-stick coating. Thanks to who? You really can't do anything but break things. I set the dish towel down. It's just a pan, Ralph. If it's ruined, I'll buy another. Buy another? You can't even afford a decent meal for yourself. You're nothing but a burden, just like that father of yours who ran off. Each word hit hard, but worse was my mother, still washing dishes, not once looking at me. My voice shook. You're not going to say anything? She hesitated, then sighed. Mabel apologized to Ralph. It's not worth making a scene. I stared at her as if she were a stranger. Years of working to lighten her load, dreaming of a real family bond, gone in an instant. I went to my room, shoved some clothes into my old backpack, tucked in my worn sketchbook, and grabbed the little money I'd saved. At the door, my mother followed, eyes worried, lips pressed shut. I thought she might stop me. She didn't say a word. Outside, light snow was falling. I walked to the bus station and bought a ticket to the nearest city, the only place I had a name for: my father. The address was from a Christmas card nearly 10 years old. The ride took hours. I clutched my backpack, watching streetlights fade into the dark. When I knocked on the door of a small wooden house, a woman I'd never seen opened it, hair messy, oversized sweater hanging loose. 2 children peeked from behind her. She looked at me, then seemed to realize. You're Mabel, aren't you? I'm looking for my dad. Is he home? Her eyes lowered. He works out of town. Gone for weeks. Truth is, he has a family here now. He's moved on. I forced a faint smile. I understand. She let me sleep on the couch, gave me a blanket and tea. In the morning, she handed me a bag of bread. Mabel, it's better if you don't come back. Not because I dislike you, but because you'll only get hurt more. I left with no destination. Slept in bus stations, sometimes in hospital waiting rooms. Ate on coins I earned clearing tables at diners. Survived by sketching the streets I saw from the sidelines. But wandering wears you down. One bitterly cold night, I found a small dog shivering under a park bench, fur soaked and matted. I knelt down. Well, looks like you don't have anyone either. Let me lift it, pressing against me, heart racing. At that moment, 3 men stumbled from a nearby bar, laughter slicing through the quiet. Memories of Ralph's taunts and my mother's silence surged back. I knew I couldn't outrun them. Then headlights swept over us. A black SUV stopped at the curb and Graham Foster stepped out. One steady look, one calm sentence, and the men melted into the dark. I didn't know whether to fear him or trust him, only that the road I'd been wandering had just taken a sharp turn. When his SUV turned onto a lane carpeted with pine needles, it felt like driving into a painting. Tall trees stood like green walls, the scent of resin and damp earth drifting in through the window. An iron gate appeared. Graham lowered the window, pressed a button on a remote. It opened to a stone path leading to two houses, a modern main house with glass walls glinting in moonlight, and a smaller one about 60 feet away, ringed with wildflowers. "That's the guest house," Graham said in the same low, spare tone he'd used that night. "You can stay here. Private. Quiet." I stepped out, still holding the dog, feeling its warmth seep into me. The air was so clean and still I could hear snow pattering softly on the eaves. He unlocked the door, switched on the lights. Warm yellow filled the space, pushing back the cold and darkness that had clung to me for weeks. "There's food in the fridge. Fresh towels in the bathroom. Lock the door from the inside. In the morning we'll talk." He set the keys on the table, lingered in the doorway as if making sure I was truly safe before leaving. "Thank you, truly." He only gave a slight nod and walked back to the main house. That night, I slept in the softest bed I'd known since leaving my mother's home. The dog curled at my feet, its breathing steady and warm. In the morning, sunlight spilled through white curtains. On the table sat a note, 9 a.m. "Come to the main house." Beside it, a bowl of dry dog food and a pot of coffee still warm. When I knocked, Graham opened immediately, wearing a dark blue shirt and holding a coffee mug. He looked different in daylight, though still carrying that natural sternness. "Sit," he said, motioning to the dining table. I pulled out a chair. The dog settled by my feet. "I need someone to manage things here. Cleaning, laundry, keeping an eye on supplies. Cooking's a plus, not required. In return, you'll live in the guest house rent-free and get a monthly salary. I need someone I can trust. Last night, you proved you protect what matters to you." I blinked. "You're offering me a job, as a housekeeper? If you want to call it that. I see it as a full role. No one will bother you here." I hesitated. I was tired of drifting. This meant a roof, stability, and a way to earn. "All right. I'll do it." "Good. Need anything to start?" "Just a few basic tools. And," I glanced toward the snow-covered garden, "I might plant a few things." "Do whatever you think is needed," he said, and asked nothing more. The next day I settled into my new routine. Mornings cleaning the living room, afternoons doing laundry and checking the kitchen. Everything in the house was spotless but lacked warmth, like it had been prepared only to be shown off. The peaceful scenery made my hands itch. I dug my old sketchbook out of my backpack, its pages curled from dampness, and began sketching what I saw: the rows of pines along the stone path, the bench beneath the maple tree, and the small frame of the dog, now called Lucky, sleeping in the sun. I didn't know Graham noticed until one afternoon, after I'd finished mopping the floors, I found a small gift box on the kitchen counter. Inside was a set of new drawing pencils, neatly arranged in a wooden case, along with a stack of fresh paper. I looked toward Graham, who stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "You bought these for me? You draw well. You shouldn't stop." His voice was brief, without any trace of condescension, as if it were simply the obvious thing to do. My palms warmed as I touched the pencils. "Thank you. But I didn't use them. Consider it an advance on your pay," he cut in, then walked away. When his figure disappeared through the doorway, I sat there staring at the pencils, unsure if I was more moved by the gift or by the way he gave it without expecting anything in return. In the days that followed, I spent my free time drawing more. The main house with its glass windows reflecting the pine forest, Lucky curled up on the rug, the afternoon light streaming through the curtains in long streaks across the wooden floor. Each sketch felt like recovering a piece of myself I'd lost long ago. But sometimes when I looked up from the page and caught Graham's gaze from the porch, I saw something closed off. Something he kept hidden, letting no one touch. And I began to wonder, how could someone give such quiet kindness while keeping so much locked away? That day the air was crisp, gray clouds blanketing the pine forest. I was in the guest house folding a stack of fresh towels when the sound of a car engine came from beyond the gate. It wasn't the deep, steady hum of Graham's SUV, but the smooth, refined purr of a luxury car. Curious, I peeked through the curtain. A sleek silver sedan pulled up in front of the main house. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall, with glossy brown hair cascading in soft waves, wearing a fitted cream dress and a long coat that made her look like she'd walked straight off the cover of a winter fashion magazine. Her sharp heels clicked against the stone path, each step ringing with precision. Graham opened the door for her. He didn't smile, only gave a small nod before stepping aside. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the guest house window was cracked open for air, and the short distance carried their words more clearly than I wanted. Her voice was smooth as silk, laced with a faint edge of mockery. "Oh, I see you've found yourself a new companion." Graham answered flatly, "She's someone I trust." Her soft laugh sent a prickle down my spine. Trust? Graham, you're letting a girl with no home, no roots, live off you. Do you realize how that looks? A pause, then his tone deepened. How it looks isn't your concern. Veronica. I heard him use her name later. Didn't seem fazed by the warning. She lowered her voice, but I still caught it. If she knew who you really are, she'd run. And you know it. My heart sank. I didn't hear Graham's reply, only their footsteps fading inside. I turned back to the towels, but my hands suddenly felt clumsy. Those words stuck in my head like a tiny nail, not sharp enough to make me cry out, but persistent enough to never let me forget. That afternoon, Graham came to the guest house as usual with the list of tasks for the day. He was his normal, composed, orderly self, but I couldn't look at him without hearing, "If she knew who you really are." I set the note down on the table. Who was the woman this morning? He hesitated for a moment. An old acquaintance. Work-related. What kind of work? I asked, my tone light but deliberate enough to show I wanted a real answer. Not something you need to worry about. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. She said, "If I knew who you were, I'd run." Do you know what that means to me? His gaze softened, but his voice stayed even. Veronica likes to say things that unsettle people. Don't let it get to you. I wanted to believe him, but in that moment I knew there was still a wall between us, and he wasn't ready to break it. The days after, I worked as usual, but my mind kept circling back to her words. One morning while cleaning the windows, I noticed faint marks on the frame, as if a sign or nameplate had once been there but was removed. One afternoon while organizing the storage room, I found a sealed cardboard box labeled, "Archived Documents. Do not discard." I didn't open it. Partly because I knew it crossed a line, partly because I was afraid I might actually find the answer. One evening, while returning a set of porcelain cups I'd washed, I found Graham standing on the main house porch. He was alone, shoulders slightly hunched, a cigarette burning between his fingers. It was the first time I'd seen him smoke. Out here late. I broke the silence. He turned, a heavy glint in his eyes. Couldn't sleep. Because of Veronica? I asked bluntly. He didn't answer right away. He stubbed out the cigarette in an ashtray, leaving a thin trail of smoke drifting into the night. There are some things, whether you know them or not, it doesn't change anything. It's better to leave them alone. I wanted to ask, what things? But he walked past me into the house. That night, lying in bed at the guest house with Lucky curled beside me, I thought about the way Graham had looked when he said that. Not like a man hiding a crime, but like one guarding an unhealed wound. How deep that wound went, I couldn't guess. The next morning, while tidying the kitchen, I noticed a brown envelope on the table, unmarked. The flap showed signs of being opened and resealed. Graham walked in just as I was setting it aside. "You didn't open it?" "I didn't touch it," I said, feeling uneasy at being suspected. He studied me for a long moment, then took the envelope and locked it in a drawer. "Thank you." The entire day I realized I was standing in a gray space, trusted enough to hold the keys to the property, yet kept outside the door that held the answers I didn't have. And the image of Veronica Hale, along with that haunting sentence, kept playing in my mind, like a warning hanging from the ceiling, ready to fall at any moment. That night, as I was about to close the guest house door, Graham appeared. He stood on the steps, hands in his pockets, looking unlike his usual self. There was a hint of tension, as if he were weighing his words before speaking. "I need to ask you for something," And it might sound a little strange, he began. I leaned lightly against the doorframe. What is it? This weekend my parents are coming. My father isn't well. Heart condition. My mother is always worried I've been living alone for too long. They want to see me settled. He hesitated for a moment, then said it outright. I want you to pretend to be my fiancé. Just for 3 days. It took me a few seconds to react. Are you serious? They'll feel more at ease if they think I'm about to get married. I don't want my father worrying more than he already does. Why me? I asked, half teasing, half serious. Because you're someone I trust. And, you know how to keep things private. I gave a wry smile. You know I've never done anything like this, right? I'm not good at pretending. Just be yourself. I'll take care of the rest. I looked at him for a long moment, feeling like I'd been pulled into something I hadn't had time to think through. But when he mentioned his father, heart problems, concern, something in me softened. Maybe because I had never seen Graham ask anyone for help with something personal. All right. But if I mess it up, don't blame me, I said, half joking. The corner of his mouth lifted, a faint smile but enough to surprise me. Deal. The next morning, Graham handed me a small box. Inside was a simple, slender silver ring. Put it on when they arrive, he said. I slipped it on. It fit so perfectly that a shiver went through me. For some reason, that small act made the whole pretend story feel more real than it should. All week, I prepared as if this were a real introduction. Cleaning the main house, checking the guest room, arranging fresh flowers. Graham didn't say much, only reminding me once or twice, don't be nervous. They're easy to get along with. But I still sensed something unusual in the way he watched every detail, as if he wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. By the weekend, the weather had turned warmer, sunlight filtering through the pines and scattering gold along the driveway. I wore the pale blue dress Graham had left out for me the night before. It fit unexpectedly well. When Thomas and Margaret's car pulled up, my heart beat faster than normal. Graham stepped out first and I followed close behind. Dad, Mom. This is Mabel, he said, his hand resting lightly on my back. A gesture so natural I nearly forgot this was an act. Hi, fiancé. Margaret's warm eyes lit up. She pulled me into an embrace without hesitation. Hello, Mabel. Finally, the one who managed to soften this son of mine. I smiled, answering with as much sincerity as I could. I'm so happy to meet you both. Thomas shook my hand, his grip steady and warm. Graham's a lucky man, he said, his deep voice carrying a trace of fatigue. Don't let him forget that. Inside, the atmosphere quickly became warm and easy. Margaret told stories from Graham's youth, from climbing trees and falling, to tinkering with the neighbor's lawn mower. I listened, occasionally glancing at Graham. He sat quietly, a faint curve to his mouth, but his gaze toward his father was different, deeper, carrying something unspoken. In the afternoon, we walked the grounds together. Thomas moved slowly, and Graham always stayed close enough to steady him if needed. Margaret held my hand, asking all kinds of questions. How I met Graham, how long we'd been together. I answered according to the script Graham had given me, but I hadn't expected her to be genuinely moved, squeezing my hand gently. Thank you for being here for him. Graham needs a home. When Margaret stepped ahead to look at the flowers, I glanced at Graham and caught him watching his father. Thomas stood under a pine, his hand resting briefly on his chest. Graham stepped quickly toward him. You all right, Dad? Thomas smiled in reassurance, but the way he gripped his son's arm told me there was a quiet undercurrent of worry between them, one I hadn't yet touched. That night, we had dinner in the large dining room, golden light spilling over the table filled with dishes Margaret had made. Laughter mixed with old stories, but whenever the future came up, wedding plans, life ahead, Graham and Thomas would exchange quick looks as if weighing every word. I didn't know what the secret was, but I was certain it wasn't just about a heart condition or ordinary family matters. And that made me realize I was stepping deeper into a story I had only meant to play a side role in. Graham's study was always locked, but that day he'd left the door open while stepping outside to take a call. I meant only to dust the shelves and leave, but when I bent to pick up a folder that had fallen from a drawer, I realized it wasn't paperwork. A thick file, its cover slightly worn, contained legal invoices with amounts that made me catch my breath. There was also a share transfer agreement for a company called Foster Holdings, signed by Graham and another name I didn't recognize. In the middle of the stack was an old photograph. A young woman holding a baby, sunlight slanting across her hair. The photo had been folded right across her eyes, as if someone had deliberately hidden them. A chill ran down my spine as I held it. This wasn't the kind of picture someone kept for nostalgia. It felt like a memory hidden away but impossible to throw out. Hearing footsteps in the distance, I quickly put everything back, wiped the desk, and tried to look as though I hadn't touched a thing. All day I couldn't focus. That folded photograph stayed in my mind along with the question. Who was she and why hide her face? After dark, I stepped onto the guest house porch to feed Lucky. Light from the main house porch spilled across the snow, and I saw Graham standing there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a cigarette. It was the first time I'd seen him smoke. The pale smoke curled around his face, his shoulders slightly hunched, so different from the steady figure he was during the day. I was about to quietly go back inside, but as I stepped down the porch steps, the wind carried his voice enough for me to hear. Only a few months left. His tone wasn't directed at anyone, more like he was speaking to himself. I froze, my heart pounding. A few months. For what? I asked softly, enough to make him startle and turn toward me. His eyes darkened as though I'd caught him in a rare moment of vulnerability. Nothing. Just work. I don't believe that. You've never let work drive you to smoke like this. He stubbed out the cigarette, his gaze shifting into something guarded. Mabel, there are things I can't tell you, not yet. Trust me, the less you know, the safer you are. The word safer sent a shiver through me. Safe from what? Graham turned away and closed the porch door. In the days that followed, I began noticing more. Every so often, thick sealed envelopes would arrive. He'd take them straight to his study and lock the door. There were phone calls he'd step outside to take, his voice low, occasionally laced with restrained anger. One afternoon while cleaning the kitchen, I heard urgent knocking at the door. A man I'd never seen before, scruffy beard, black coat, asked, "Is Graham home?" When I told him he was out, the man glanced around, his eyes scanning like he was taking mental notes, then shoved an old business card into my hand. "If he wants to get anything back, tell him to call me." I didn't get the chance to ask before he walked off. The card had no name, only a string of numbers and an address in another state. That night, I placed it on the kitchen counter when Graham came home. He looked at it for all of 2 seconds, then picked it up, crumpled it, and tossed it in the trash. "If that man ever comes to you, don't respond." "Why?" I asked. "Because he'll drag you into things you can't even imagine." For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. I began wondering if all of this tied back to his father, the man he always looked at with a mixture of love and guilt, or to the woman in that folded photograph. One evening, as I was folding blankets in the main house living room, Graham walked in. He watched me for a moment before asking, "Mabel, do you trust me?" I looked up, caught off guard by the question. "I want to. But you're not giving me a reason to. There are things, when the time comes I'll tell you. But if I stay silent, it's not because you don't matter. It's because I don't want you carrying what I'm carrying." The look in his eyes made my throat tighten. I realized that, though distance still stood between us, in that moment Graham had shown me a glimpse of himself, tired and lonelier than I had ever imagined. I was hanging bed sheets on the guest house porch when the crunch of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Looking up, I saw the familiar silver sedan. Veronica stepped out, immaculate as ever, not a hair out of place. But this time, Graham wasn't there to greet her. She walked straight toward me, her heels striking the gravel like a steady drumbeat against my chest. "We need to talk," she began with no hint of a question. I set the laundry basket down. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." "Oh, I think you'll want to hear this." Veronica tilted her head, brown eyes glinting with triumph. "Has Graham told you anything about his past? Or is he still as good at keeping secrets as he used to be?" My heartbeat slowed as if bracing for a blow. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "He used to be the CEO of Foster Holdings, a major corporation. But he vanished from the business world after being accused of involvement in his sister's death." "Claire Foster. You're saying he was accused of killing his sister?" "No one could prove it. The case was buried. But when Claire died, her child, the one in the photo I assume you've seen, became the center of a legal war. Graham wanted custody, but Claire's in-laws, They're very rich, very powerful, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep the child. Even if it means destroying him. My hands went cold. The pieces suddenly connected. The stack of legal files, the share transfer documents, the way he looked at his father, the phrase "only a few months left," and that folded photograph. Veronica went on, her voice smooth as if reciting a story she'd memorized. Why do you think he's here hiding in the woods instead of an office tower? It's not to find peace. It's so no one can find him. Why are you telling me this? Maybe because I feel sorry for you. You're cleaning house for a man you don't know has been called far worse things out there. Or maybe I want to see how you'll react when you know the truth. She turned away, leaving only a faint trace of perfume. The silver car rolled off, leaving me frozen on the porch. That afternoon, Graham came home, the hem of his shirt faintly streaked with mud. He saw me sitting on the steps with Lucky, my eyes far away. Something wrong. I looked up, wrestling with myself for a moment before asking outright, "Claire Foster, was she your sister?" He froze. For a brief moment, I saw a defensive wall slam down behind his eyes. "Who told you?" "Veronica," I said plainly. "She told me about Claire's death. About the child. And about you disappearing to avoid being destroyed." Graham drew a slow breath, setting his car keys on the nearby table. "She shouldn't have dragged you into this. I was in it from the moment you brought me here," I said, my voice unsteady but clear. "How long were you planning to keep it from me?" He stayed silent, his gaze drifting toward the pines in the distance. After a long moment, he sat on the steps, close enough for Lucky to rest his head on his leg. "Claire was my only sister," he began, his voice deep but steady. "She married Mark Halston, heir to a powerful family. Perfect on the outside, controlling and abusive on the inside. She hid it all until I figured it out and tried to get her away from him. But one winter night, she died in a car crash. They said she lost control. I don't believe it." He paused, running his hand gently through Lucky's fur as if to keep himself grounded. "I was blamed. Not officially, but enough for the media and people in the industry to believe I was involved. I lost my position as CEO, lost my name. And worst of all, I almost lost Emily, Claire's daughter." My throat tightened. "You're fighting for custody?" "Yes. But they have money, power, and an army of lawyers to prove I'm unfit. The final hearing is in a few months. Pius, I'll never see Emily again." I remembered the look in his eyes that first night. The look of someone who had lost almost everything but was still standing. Now I understood. It wasn't the look of a kind stranger, but of a man fighting every day to hold on to the last thing he had left. Quietly I said, "You should let me help. Mabel, this is my fight. And it will consume anyone who stands too close. You pulled me off a road I didn't know would lead anywhere good. Don't think I'll let you walk yours alone." He didn't answer right away, but I saw something in his eyes that wasn't pure defense anymore. There was a small glimmer, whether of hope or trust I couldn't yet name. I remember that night clearly. Outside, the fog was thick, tree shadows faint against the stone path. Graham sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of him. When I stepped in, he looked up, his eyes no longer as guarded as usual, but carrying the weight of someone who'd been holding himself together all day. Graham took a deep breath, as if he'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. "The final hearing will be in 3 months. One of the factors they're targeting is stability in my personal life. If I can prove I'm about to get married, that I have a clear, warm family environment, my chances will be higher. I want you to be my fiancé. Not just to reassure my parents, but to show the court as well." I stayed still for a moment. What he was asking meant far more than our previous pretend arrangement. This time it wasn't just a weekend role. It meant putting my name into his story, one I knew would be scrutinized in every detail from glances to the past. "You know this is the center of a storm, right?" I asked. "I know," he replied without hesitation. "And I don't want to pull you in if you're not ready. Mabel, I trust you. You don't perform to please people, and that's exactly what they'll see." I leaned back in my chair, trying to line up my thoughts. "Graham, I don't have a spotless past. I ran away from home, slept in bus stations, did whatever I had to just to survive. If they dig deep, they'll find it all. Have you thought about that?" "I have. But I've also thought about how they'll see a woman who overcame all of that. And that's more powerful than any spotless record." I gave a faint laugh. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know whether to cry or be moved. You make it sound easy. But in court, they're not going to see me that way. Then I'll make sure they see me, Graham said, his eyes suddenly sharpening. I'll make them see that I chose you. Not for appearances, not for advantage, but because I trust and respect you. And that's the environment I want for Emily. Hearing that, something in me shifted. I remembered the first time I saw him, standing in the dark facing 3 strangers and still speaking calmly. I remembered how he quietly set the new sketch set on my table, no strings attached. And now he was looking at me with that same gaze, not asking but giving me the choice. I rested my hand on the table, meeting his eyes. If I say yes, what will I have to do? Graham's shoulders eased as if he'd been expecting that question. We'll prepare together. Dinner with the lawyers so they understand our story. Appear at a few community events to show the relationship. And when we're in court, I need you there, steady. Don't let them see a single crack. And if I say no? He paused, then answered softly, then I'll still respect it. I'll find another way. But I might lose. I could hear that word, lose, ringing in my head. Losing wouldn't just mean losing custody of Emily. It would mean letting a child grow up in the house of people who had made her mother live in fear. I clenched my hand. Are you sure you won't regret choosing me? Do you think I'm the kind of man who makes choices without thinking them through? He tilted his head slightly, the faintest smile touching his lips. I thought about this before I asked. For some reason, that answer warmed my chest even as my mind urged caution. All right. But I have one condition. You tell me everything I need to know. Don't keep me on the outside. His eyes softened for the first time tonight, looking like a weight had been lifted. Deal. We sat there for a while longer, silent except for the ticking clock and the sound of Lucky shifting under the table. In that moment, I knew I'd stepped onto a road no one could promise would be safe. But I also knew that if I walked away, I'd have to live with the feeling of abandoning someone who had once saved me, and that would weigh even heavier. I had never imagined I'd walk into a courtroom as a witness, let alone stand beside Graham in a battle that could change his life. That day, the courthouse hallway was packed. Reporters clustered at the entrance, cameras flashing non-stop. Graham walked beside me, black suit immaculate, his expression so unreadable no one could guess what he was thinking. When his hand brushed mine, I felt both his warmth and the tension running deep. The hearing began with the Halston family's presentation. Their lawyer spoke smoothly, like reading a script he'd rehearsed 100 times. They painted Graham as emotionally unstable, burdened by his past, and incapable of raising a child in a healthy environment. Then my name was called. The man across the table smirked as he laid out old photos. Me sleeping on a bench at a bus station, holding a bag of food from a soup kitchen. This is the woman Mr. Foster intends to marry, he said clearly to the court. A woman with an unstable past, no home, no steady income for years. Your Honor, we must ask, is this truly a role model for a child? Heat rushed to my face. I had known they would dig, but it still cut deep to have my past torn open in front of strangers. I glanced at Graham. He sat straight, eyes fixed on me as if silently reminding me, don't let them take your voice. When I was allowed to respond, I stood. My voice shook at first, then steadied. Yes, I slept in bus stations. I had no home. But that also means I understand the value of having one. And I see clearly that Graham Foster is the kind of person who can give Emily what I never had as a child. Safety, love, and absolute protection. The opposing lawyer tried to cut in, but I had been ready for this moment. I placed a small USB drive on the judge's bench. And I have evidence that the accusations against Graham Foster are not unbiased. The judge signaled to play the recording. Veronica Hale's voice, unmistakable, filled the room, discussing with a man a payment to ensure the witness says what we want, to pin blame on Graham in Claire's case. When the audio ended, the room fell silent. Even the other side's lawyer froze. The judge struck the gavel, voice firm. We will open a new investigation into this evidence. In the meantime, temporary custody will be granted to Mr. Graham Foster. I heard Margaret, Graham's mother, give a quiet sob in the back row. Thomas gripped her hand tightly. Graham said nothing, but under the table, his hand found mine and squeezed hard. Outside, the press swarmed instantly. Flashbulbs popped, questions came rapid fire. Do you have a comment on the new allegation? Where did you find the recording? Graham, is this why you disappeared from the public eye? Graham leaned down toward me and murmured, "Let's go." He slipped an arm around my shoulders, steering me through the crowd to the SUV waiting at the corner. I turned to see him leaning back in the seat, eyes half closed as if taking a long, steady breath. "I'm sorry," I said, "for not asking you before handing over that evidence." His eyes opened, locking on me, a mix of seriousness and gentleness. "Mabel, you didn't only save my life, you saved Emily's as well." I pressed my lips together, about to speak, but he continued, "But we've only won one round. They won't stop. You need to be ready for things to get harder." I knew he was right. His eyes no longer carried the defiance I'd once seen, but the alertness of a man who understood the storm was far from over. Still, there was something else. Deep in those eyes, I saw a trust he had never shown before. As the SUV turned onto the stone path leading home, I looked out the window at the pine forest standing silent in the evening fog. I knew the months ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt I wasn't on the sidelines of Graham's story. I was right in the middle of it and ready to face what was coming. Emily arrived on a morning when pale sunlight filtered through the pines. The black car stopped at the gate, and when Graham lifted her out, I realized I had never seen him smile like that. Not the polite kind meant for strangers, but a warm, almost unbelievable smile of relief. Emily tucked her head against his shoulder, clutching a worn stuffed bear. When Graham introduced me, she only gave a small nod, her wide eyes quietly observing. Lucky ran in circles, tail wagging as if recognizing a new member of the family. In the beginning, Emily was reserved. She ate little, slept fitfully, and startled at sudden noises. I didn't ask Graham for details, but I suspected the shadows of her earlier years still clung to her. So I chose to let Emily find her own sense of safety here, rather than force it. In the mornings, I made simple breakfasts: toast, eggs, and a warm glass of milk. Graham often sat nearby, reading the news but always keeping an eye on Emily, asking now and then, "Did you sleep well?" She would answer briefly, but sometimes the corner of her mouth would lift, like a smile caught halfway. In the afternoons, I took her to the back garden. We planted rows of lavender while Lucky dug haphazard holes in the far corner. Once, as I was setting a young plant in the soil, Emily reached out to help pat the dirt down. Her eyes met mine for a second before darting away. It was a small moment, but I knew I'd stepped a little closer into her world. In the main house living room, I hung my latest painting, 3 of us and Lucky standing in front of the guest house. Emily stared at it for a long while before quietly asking, "Who's this for?" "All of us," I said slowly. "Because this is home." She stayed quiet, but the next day I saw her place her stuffed bear right beneath the frame, as if silently agreeing. Graham saw the painting when he returned from the lawyer's office. He stood before it for a long time, then turned to me. "I think we've both stopped running." His words touched an emptiness I had carried for years. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about leaving, finding some faraway train station, or keeping a packed bag ready. I thought about planting more flowers by the porch, about hearing Emily's small footsteps on the wooden floor each morning, about the scent of coffee and scattered but genuine laughter. But even peace had its cracks. Whenever Graham took a call outside, his voice would drop, his eyes narrowing slightly as if gauging a threat. I couldn't hear the words, but something in my gut told me those who had tried to destroy him and take Emily hadn't stopped. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, I saw Graham on the porch, holding a mug of tea, his gaze fixed on the dark road beyond the gate. I stepped out, wrapped in a sweater, and stood beside him. "Something wrong?" I asked. "I know it's not over. And I don't want Emily or you caught in it again. You don't have to face it alone. You pulled me out of a dark place, Graham. Don't think I'll go back there just to let you stand alone." His eyes softened, and he drew me into a slow embrace, as if trying to memorize the feeling. Somewhere inside the house, Lucky gave a single bark, then fell silent. I leaned into his shoulder, listening to the whisper of pine needles, and I knew that no matter what the road ahead held, I had found where I wanted to stand. Not to run, but to stay with Graham, with Emily, with this home. Every time I watch Emily playing with Lucky in the yard, I find myself wondering, is family always born of blood, or is it sometimes built from strangers willing to hold on to each other in the middle of a storm? Our story is still unfolding, and I know the days ahead won't all be sunny. But for now, at least, we've found a home where we can face whatever comes, together. And what about you? If you were in my place, would you be willing to step into the heart of a storm to protect a stranger, the way Graham did for me? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your perspective. If you want to keep following heartfelt yet storm-filled stories about family, love, and the choices we make, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are so many more stories I want to share with you, stories that might make you see yourself in them and cherish what you have just a little more.